So I wanted to present not only as myself but also on behalf of the kind of group that I'm involved with sometimes, which is the Louisiana Creole Virtual Classroom. I'll be talking mostly about the activities of this virtual classroom today in the domain of neologism creation and curriculum development. And I thought that since my friends are the ones who did all of the work creating the resources, then it's only fair that I kind of am acting more as a representative for them than anything else. So I want to introduce you first of all to Louisiana and to Louisiana Creole, which is our language, one of the languages that's spoken in Louisiana. And I choose this map specifically to point out here's Louisiana, but that it's always been part of this region, especially the Gulf of Mexico region. Before the colonization of Louisiana, there was a lot of contact, for example, between the Yucatan and Louisiana. And in the colonial world, in the French colonial world, Louisiana was really part of this sphere. It wasn't until 1803 that the United States took control of Louisiana, when it was sold to Napoleon, and sold by Napoleon. And before that, it was controlled by the French, the Spanish, and then the French again. So we've had a diverse kind of administration since colonization. And I mean, settlement in this region goes back a very, very, very long time. And there are these very big mounds that were built by the indigenous population, and which are really, we don't know a lot about. Here's another picture. This is from a recent kayaking trip that I took in Louisiana. And this is one of our lakes. Louisiana is mostly consists of the Mississippi Delta and the basin of this river. It's an extremely biodiverse place. It has a lot of different species. I'll show some pictures later, and also a lot of the land is uninhabitable. So on this map it looks like it's a contiguous piece of land that you can walk all around, but in fact most of the place looks like this, and the water is at varying levels. Right now the water is very, very high, where I just came back from Louisiana. Okay, so the Creole language is the language that was born really through, like many Creole languages, through the colonization process and through especially the slave trade. So there were thousands of people who were enslaved and taken from West Africa, West African ports to Louisiana, and who created very complex plantation societies. We know almost nothing about these sorts of societies compared to the attention that has been given to, for example, the French colonial administration and all of this. And these are some slave cabins near to one of my field sites. You can see these still all around Louisiana, and I think it's really important to kind of give this background because it tells you a little bit more context about the types of social judgments that are placed on speakers of this language. And I'll go into that into a second. But first, I think we had so much music and dancing, so I wanted to share some music from Louisiana in Creole and English. It's just loading. Maybe it crashed. I think it crashed. So this is a song by one of the most famous singers of the early 20th century. And she was a jazz singer. It's crashed, so I just have to reload. But I want you to see it because it's a very nice video.
Oh, yeah.
Ah, now you can see her. Okay, wonderful. Okay. This is Louis Armstrong, the trumpet.
She's the greatest jazz singer of our day. Jazz? I mean that. Why, Dr. W. She is the rock and the roll. And I'm thinking
to Creole and say the same thing. Okay. So this is interesting because you can see that already. This was in 1957, this performance. So at this time it was complete bilingualism in Louisiana. And it represents really the end point of a long process of Americanization. And as part of that process of Americanization, which began at the beginning of the 19th century, but intensified after the Civil War, was introduced not only a policy of English-only education, but a policy of racial segregation under Jim Crow. So this is very important because before the Americans came to Louisiana, there was not this division black and white. We had a three-way legal distinction between what were called black, white, and free people of color, and more or less 8 physical categories. So similar to in Mexico, how it was in the Spanish colonial period. And this has left a deep, deep mark on Louisiana that is visible even today. And it's difficult sometimes to communicate this to Europeans because it's so hard to imagine that you can walk from one side of a town to another and it's completely divided racially still today. So this has a lot of implications for, of course, for the society, also for linguistic variation, for language practices, and this is something that I looked at in my PhD, the impact of racial segregation on language variation. And in terms of the vitality of the language, this also has an important role. Both white and black people speak Creole in Louisiana. But it is communities of color, Creoles of color, as they're called in Louisiana, who are really the guardians of the language now, because white people will reject and pretend not to speak the language, basically, because the association of the language is not only with slavery, but also with blackness. So it's, for example, I know many white people who speak Creole and speak it with each other, but in front of Louisiana French speakers, they will not speak Creole. And they'll try to speak French and accommodate in this way. And even today, I mean, I was speaking Creole once in a village with a friend of mine, and somebody came up to me, and a white guy came up to me and he said, "Oh, you speak that N French." And this is completely alive still, this idea. And to give you kind of a sense of that more tangibly, I was watching this Notre Dame last night, and I was thinking that in the last month we have had 3 or 4 church burnings in Louisiana. So what this means is it's the same that the KKK used to do, that a group of white people will go into a black community and burn down the church to terrorize the community and to make them feel under, this terrible kind of pressure to, I don't know the purpose of this, but it continues even to this day, and even amongst people of my generation too. This, of course, has a lot of impact on language practice, like I said. The other thing that's important is environment. In Louisiana, we have a place called Cancer Alley. This is a place where petrochemical plants have their enormous facilities along the Mississippi River. In this place, the cancer rate is 800 times the national average. So practically everybody has some kind of cancer, and that's not mentioning, by the way, other diseases, because there are many other diseases that are not cancer that people are suffering from. And people in these regions, they can't afford to move out. They sue the companies. There have been lawsuits since these pictures were taken in the late 80s, and there have been lawsuits, but the company's tactic is always to drag out the lawsuit long enough that the people die. So we have now in Louisiana less than 6,000 speakers of Creole. All of these people, almost without exception, are over the age of 60. In Louisiana, if you are in your 60s and you live in this kind of place, in Cancer Alley, which many Creole speakers do, then you're really getting to your life expectancy. Yes. So this is kind of to give you the reality of what's going on the ground. And I want to also talk about the response to the minoritization of French and Creole in Louisiana since the 19th century. There have been two separate movements. Again, these movements have been totally shaped by the racial and social dynamics of Louisiana. This is the founding members of the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, which was founded in the 1960s as a response to the civil rights movement by white Francophones. So the Civil Rights Act came in, and suddenly there were all of these protections given to minority groups, especially to people of color. And these guys said, okay, we as French speakers, we also want to have some kind of protection as a minority. They constructed themselves and the state of Louisiana as a French-speaking white population, to the exclusion of all of the Francophones and Creolophones of color in the state. So there was no involvement from them at all in this, what is now a state agency, so it's a government agency for French. And they've been very successful, and they do some really wonderful programs now. They have a lot of immersion schools. So this time when I was in Louisiana, I ended up spending a lot of time with children from immersion schools, and they speak French. They don't speak Louisiana French, but they speak French, and that's really interesting. Now, there was a response to this French movement.
Why don't they speak Louisiana French?
Because, okay, so these guys started the immersion school with the idea that Louisiana French was bad French, and that everybody should learn French from France. So that's the first thing. So the first thing they wanted to do was take many teachers from outside of Louisiana, from the Francophone world, and bring them to Louisiana to teach. At that time, they had the choice. They could have chosen people from inside Louisiana and developed a curriculum for Louisiana French. Now, there's nobody left who can, I mean, there are very few people left who can really teach in a school who are qualified, who speak French. There are, though, some teachers from Louisiana who are teaching Louisiana French in Louisiana schools, but the majority are people from all over the Francophone world. Actually, it's really wonderful because it's really, I think, you know, even though there is always this tension between immersion school French and the French of grandparents, it's important for the children because they can see that French is something spoken all over the world. It's very interesting. A lot of them end up doing very interesting things, becoming language activists, and they can learn Louisiana French having learned some variety of French, whether their teacher is from Mali or from Belgium or from Canada. So yes, this is why. But for Creole, there's nothing.
So they actually have black teachers speaking French from Africa?
Yes, yes. Now they
are. I mean, they are like from Africa and
not from Louisiana. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, basically all are from Africa.
Yeah.
Nowadays, so that's interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, I'm giving quite a critical history of this organization, but of course now it's completely. I mean, the people involved in this are very, you know, very nice people, and it's completely diversified since then to a meaningful extent. Although of course there are some in Louisiana, there's always somebody. Okay, so this is the response to this French revival movement was the Creole of color community taking up Creole as a symbol of their identity. And they were not only leaders in the cultural revitalization of the Creole language and of their particular cultural practices, but also in the civil rights movement in Louisiana. So these are just some pictures of people who were the founding members, a few friends of mine. I'll talk about them later. And then here's some more people that I know, and with a very famous Creole general from Louisiana who coordinated the hurricane relief in Katrina, and was he's kind of a hero for a lot of people in Louisiana. Okay, so this is what's going on the ground in Louisiana. This is what's going on online, and I want to talk about how these two come together, specifically in the domain of neologisms and curriculum development, and what that might mean for the future of the language. Because right now we're at a critical period where these two communities are interacting. This is the Louisiana Creole language fan page on Facebook, which has thousands of people following it from all over the world, especially in the United States and Louisiana, of course. And it's the public face for an online community that has many different facets and aspects. They produce also this t-shirt. I wanted to wear it, but it's too cold. Maybe you can pass it around to me.
Should I show it or pass it around?
Yeah, maybe people want to read it. So I'll go into a little bit the infrastructure online that's going on, and how this is not just a Facebook page, but a whole community of practice that's congregating online. And I've been involved with this for a really long time now, for probably at least 6 or 7 years, and I've been writing an ethnography of this community, and this comes out of this ethnography, participant observation of this community. So we have the fan page that I mentioned here. So the fan page creates a kind of public face for this online community. It engages people. It's like the Tomadi Greco page. They share a lot of content. They attract people who are interested in the Creole language, and they share resources for learning the language. Now, if you hang out enough on this page, comment enough, then you can get an invitation to the virtual classroom. And this is a secret group on Facebook. It's a closed group, not anyone can enter. And in here they have a specific planned curriculum of activities, a community of different learners of different stages who are involved in different kinds of interaction. And there is a group of people who are basically advanced learners from the virtual classroom, who have become now what are called facilitators. So the facilitators have their own other Facebook group, and in this group they create and plan the activities for the virtual classroom. They create resources, and these resources extend to an orthography, with an orthography guide, flashcards, online flashcards and physical flashcards, an online dictionary, which is a digitized version of a very big language documentation project done by a number of academics, Albert Waldman, Thomas Klingler, and Kevin Rotet, amongst them. And they sort of digitized this and put this online. Not with the permission of the authors of the dictionary, but they did it anyway. The dictionary is out of print, also, I should mention. We're working now on a textbook. We have already put out a first edition, which is very bare bones, but now we're making it much more content, and then a lot of graphics. And this is especially Adrienne Gillian-Chapman, who I will show some of the stuff that she's created, who creates this wonderful interactive activities, graphics, that people can see, that are shared on the fan page and in the classroom, and that people can engage with. So to talk a little bit about the curriculum that we have, this is Christophe's post. Christophe is the guy behind all of this. He's the mastermind who started this whole thing, and it's kind of snowballed. I've taken away the last names of people who aren't kind of in the facilitators group who didn't give me permission to share. So in the group, you're only allowed to use Louisiana Creole, or Kurivini as it's called by this movement, and English. You cannot use any other language, and this is very strict. You can get kicked out of the group if you use, for example, Haitian Creole, even if you talk too much about the other languages, because they want to keep it focused on Louisiana Creole. Group members must participate. So if you don't post enough, if you're not engaging in the activities, you're out. And Christophe comes, he posts in the group, I'm coming with my axe, chop, 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 get posting. So it's quite strict, and you know, this is different forms of encouragement of using language. So Adrian came up this year with a new curriculum that we're using, which is monthly challenges. So the monthly challenges mean that there's a theme for every month a different topic. And at the beginning of the year, everybody who wanted to join in made a New Year's resolution. Okay, I'm going to join in the challenges. Every month, I promise I'll post about the topic and I'll do the activities. So one of the activities is to write in the group every day, or as often as you can, something about the theme. So the theme, as you can see, for this April challenge is cooking. And she writes in Creole, Pendant nous avons cuit, nous te dit manger et ver bien en Kurivini. Nous avons écrit un raclette pour étudier. So we wrote a recipe all in Creole. We talked about our food and the cooking in Creole with her family, so with her children too. So it's not just people in the group who are learning Creole in this way, but it's also their extended families, especially in Adrian's case, because she's extremely dedicated. I want to show some of the things that we've created. This is the orthography guide. This is the first edition of the textbook, but it's going to be much improved when it is eventually finished. And then this whole host of online resources on YouTube, on different websites. I'll show you a few. This is an example of something that Adrian created. It's a 19th century folk tale that was documented by a folklorist back then. She has put it into the orthography used by this group, put it with lots of nice colorful graphics, and the idea is that you can use this with your children, and it's a very funny, interesting story. She's also made things like this. This is an activities for learning directions. You can make different routes through the town and practice different directions, different vocabulary items. There's also an engagement with outside organizations and with discourses of language endangerment in general. So for example, they translated a quote from Nelson Mandela for the UN International Mother Tongue Day, Mother Language Day, and posted this on the fan page. This is the Louisiana Creole Dictionary. I looked up the word for Italian. And like Totoma di Greco, we're also using the Memrise platform. So this is also Adrian, who is, I'm telling you, Adrian is really dedicated. There are more than 863 words in this flashcard set. All of them now has audio as well. So you can hear how the word is pronounced as well. So for example, if I were to click here, then you would hear Adrian say, Comment y'appelles toi? And then you have different learners who are creating different comments here. And it's really successful. One issue that's ongoing in the community, and actually I just was checking last night, and there was a new discussion about neologisms, what I didn't include here, is how do we come up with neologisms? Should we come up with neologisms? Because Louisiana Creole has a specific lexicon. It's a Creole language, it's a French lexified Creole language, so 85% of the of the vocabulary are from French. And these are estimates based on different studies of the Louisiana Creole lexicon. The contribution of West African, so-called Amerindian and Spanish vocabulary is very, very small. These are mostly terms, for example, indigenous terms for plant and animal life. There are also terms which form part of the vocabulaire des îles, so different kinds of things that were transported around the French colonial world in the Caribbean, mostly indigenous terms and some from West African languages as well. And English makes up a significant proportion of the lexicon. In fact, I looked at the composition of English lexical items in spontaneous speech for my PhD thesis. So this is a corpus of about 200,000 words. And most of these are in fact not English terms that are used, for example, to name new technologies like aeroplane, television, all of this stuff, i.e. filling lexical gaps, but instead replacing native Louisiana Creole terms. So there is a lot of code switching between English and Creole, and actually now the norm is not the monolingual mode. The norm is to be in a bilingual mode with English and Creole. I found this out during my fieldwork because I would speak monolingual Creole and people would have a very strange reaction to this, and it's really the norm to switch between different languages. And this is reflected in attitudes towards code switching and neologisms in the community. So people say, this is how we do it. We flip in and out, flip between languages. And oftentimes you can hear Creole spoken as a broken language. This also has to do with negative attitudes, but also it has to do with the perception that Creole is formed from many different lexical elements. Online, however, there's a different story. The online revitalization community, they say neologisms sound good. If the language is going to survive and thrive, the speakers of Creole need to create new words to express 21st century concepts instead of just adopting English words. This is a very, very, very different thing that's going on in the online community. So there are a few choices for creating neologisms that the revitalization community online is making. They can take from English, they can take from French, they can take from other Creole languages. And an example of that is, for example, the word for computer in Creole. If you speak with Creole-speaking people in Louisiana, they'll say, "Moi j'ai un computer," I have a computer. But if you speak with people from the online revitalization community, they'll say, "Moi j'ai un ordinateur," which is obviously from French. Another interesting case, there are clavier for keyboard, écran for screen. The whole computer infrastructure is made up of neologisms coined on the basis of French. Perhaps quite a special way that neologisms are created by the online community is by looking at language documentation materials. So in the Dictionary of Louisiana Creole, it's an extremely good dictionary. These authors did so much work to document different lexical items used by different speakers, including things which are very rare forms that were used only once in the corpus. These are all documented with the location, etc. One of the examples is the word for aeroplane, which is bâtiment d'art. You can find in the dictionary one entry for bâtiment d'art, building of the sky. And this has now been adopted by the revitalization community because it's much more distinctive than what most people use in Louisiana, which is airplane. And then, of course, there are more creative coinages that are, for example, calqued on English. Place La Toile is one that was coined a few years ago to mean website. La Toile is web, like a spider web, and place is a place. And I'll just show you how this happens, because I want to show you something particular about the interaction in the community and how neologisms spread. So to get there, I'm just going to go back and let you observe the interaction on this comment thread. what happens is this is a facilitator, this is a senior learner, advanced learner. She comments, she makes her post, and then people who are less advanced will comment and ask questions. Is raclette recipe, he's asking, and she said, and then another person says, Claire says, yes, I need to know as well. I didn't look any of this. And then Adrian replies and says, yes, this is what recipe is. It's raclette or recette. And you see many of these kind of interactions, not just for lexical items here. I chose it because we're talking about neologisms. Also for grammatical constructions, other kinds of things. This is a mediated learning that's happening in the classroom in a structured way. Because it's often that advanced learners are mediating the learning and acquisition of their less advanced learners, and then in time these learners become themselves advanced learners, become members of the facilitators group, and then welcome in new members in this way. And this is something which is kind of semi-planned, but also a spontaneous organic development. And you can trace the path of neologisms in this way. So for example, Christophe Landry, who's the brains behind the operation, or the founder of this group, he posted in the group one day, I'm playing around with creolizing modern terms ordinarily used in English. How about place la toile for website, place, place or site, la toile web? So a lot of people liked this, commented on this, and then a few months later, somebody was commenting and they were having a conversation, and she says, so-and-so, what's that website, using the word website, not Place La Toile, where I can see Creole videos. And then they're talking about these web pages, and somebody else comments, the word website is cute. But Christophe was playing around with words and he called website Place La Toile. It's not written in stone, but it sounds good. It's better than other options, because there were some other options that we could have for like place fil, wire site, place filet, site that is wide, but filet is also a cooking ingredient. It's like dried sassafras. And then people comment, okay, that will be interesting to see. Now this person who originally used the word website, a few months later comments, and now she's using Place La Toile. So now she makes it part of her lexicon and starts to use it. So there's no explicit instruction here, okay, this is what you must use. But in this way, neologisms are proliferated throughout the online community. And in my master's thesis, I looked not only at the lexicon, but at the morphosyntactic constructions used by the online community versus the offline community. And you can see that this kind of variation proliferates in the online community, also in the morphosyntactic domain. So there are specific constructions which are very online and you won't find on the ground. So to conclude and sum up, I want to think a little bit about the future. This was a couple of months ago, a really interesting interaction between a lot of different people. So in this picture you can see people from the French movement, from the Creole movement, from the online community, and also you can see some people here who are visiting from Martinique, because there was a culture art exchange from Martinique, hosted in the building of an art community. This is the art community where I stay when I'm doing my fieldwork. And everybody was together and speaking Creole and investigating the differences between the varieties. And increasingly the link not only with the online world, but also with the wider Creolophonie, so Martinique, Guadeloupe, especially French lexified Creole world, is very, very important in driving home the language revitalization. And in this picture, also a couple of months ago, we are a bunch of people from very different places all over the world. Ingrid Neumann-Holscher was the first person to write a grammar of Louisiana Creole. She published in the 1980s as her PhD thesis. Mavis Arnaud-Fruget is the matriarch of Louisiana French. Amanda Lafleur is another very important language activist. Herb Wiltz is a very important activist from the Creole community and for the Creole language, and we're writing together the textbook with a couple of people from online, with Adrian and another friend Nathan. And Tiffany is a new learner from the online world. So now all of these worlds are getting mixed together. And the resources that are being used, for example, in Mr. Wiltz's classes, are based on the orthography and neologisms from the online community, as well as his own resources. So now you have this whole different group of people who are learning Creole using resources that have kind of trickled down from this Facebook community and that have been integrated with existing lessons that Mr. Wiltz had been making since the 1960s. So we're at a critical point. I don't know what is going to happen, but I'm optimistic that like this alligator, the appetite for Creole language will grow and grow. I'd be very interested to hear your feedback on what's going on in Louisiana. Merci. Thank you very much. Grazie. Let's go.
I know that many linguists say that the easiest way to create a neologism is calc.
Yeah.
So to take the, well, maybe English or French, but then adjust it to the language, and after some years no one actually notices it, or people don't even know that it came from the other language, because I think these are like creating all new words that I think maybe in this community that is super motivated and is very puristic, maybe they can start using them, but this feels like a method that is in the real world not very successful.
Yeah, I mean it's true, because there's no regulatory body of Creole speakers, and because it's normal to code switch, the issue of neologism on the ground is not existing. I mean, I've never been to a meeting where people have said, "Oh, we should come up with a word for computer in Creole." I don't know anybody in the offline world who's done that, because they just say, "Oh, but it's just normal for us, we just flip in and out." So one of the things that's interesting in this confrontation between the online and offline worlds is actually what's going to happen when you get somebody who's been learning online who walks into a room full of, you know, elderly Creole speakers and say, "Oh, Moutin Homo Place La Toile, I was on my website," and they're gonna be, I mean, in Creole, Place La Toile sounds very strange also if you haven't learned that as an online learner.
So what I'm suggesting is that these methods are super patriotic for this community, but maybe it's more realistic to have methods that are closer to the original, or adapting as one. Okay, you were adapting the French ordinateur to the writing way.
No, I agree.
So
and
these methods might be more accepted by the offline.
Exactly. I've said this before too. You know, we discuss it all the time, and most of the people in the group are actually not living in Louisiana; they're in the diaspora. And whenever I speak Creole, I don't use. I mean, there are not. First of all, there are not enough neologisms. Second of all, it's just you couldn't be understood by people if you used ordinateur, for example. People would not understand. Even in Louisiana French, if you use ordinateur, people will not know what you're talking about. They say, okay, something to do with ordiner, but so I think that it's wonderful to encourage multilingual practices and code switching. I find it very fun. It also forms the basis for a lot of humor and jokes in Creole. So I agree with you. It's an ongoing discussion. I should have really framed it in that way. Yes.
Thank you. This is really interesting. I don't know if you know Nebekisis by Louisiana. It was done about 6 or 7 years ago, and it was on neologisms in the American Indian Community SOC in Oklahoma.
Okay, interesting.
And where they're even more puristic. And they didn't want to have any English borrowings at all. And what she was looking at, they had the few elderly speakers were helping the younger learners create new words. So they were actively engaged in neologism. But she was interested in what was really actually taking root, what the elders really down the, a few weeks to a few months to a year later were actually using, and the younger people as well. And the calcs were easiest to create, but didn't always take on. One of the things she found is that the semantic extensions were what was really taking root. And you didn't give any examples from that. I don't know if they're occurring. But again, the people who are online and that are interested in the history of their language are probably going to pull some out.
Yes.
And, I don't know, naturally or online, extend these. You might look at that. If there is.
Thank you. That's really good. That's a really good feedback, because there are many examples of semantic extension, and that it's very interesting because that is something that is in common with both online and offline spheres.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. But of course, not exactly the same semantic extensions, but both are.
And also, without being stated, is kind of satisfies that it's our language that we're using, because they're reusing old terms that have fallen into disuse.
Yeah.
But I think it's also just kind of a natural human. Well, I mean, all of it is. It comes from human language, but there's something really organic about the semantic extensions, I think.
Yeah, it's true. So, for example, the word, if you want to say "I drive my car," you can have a choice. Sorry? Louder. If you want to say "I drive my car," the word for car in Louisiana French and in Creole comes from the word for chariot in French, so char. But in different communities, it's different. So some places they say "mo drive, mo char," drive. Some people say "mo gouverne," so I govern my car, but just I control my car. Some people say "mo drive, mo automobile." So there is a diversity between every village in the kinds of, and this would be a very good thing to look at, semantic extension. Yes, thank you.
Okay. I wanted to ask what happens when someone don't accept this new word. Is there some kind of fight on internet that don't accept this word?
So the structure of the virtual classroom is very hierarchical. So Christoph, the founder of the group, he has the final word on everything, from orthography disputes to neologisms. Now people play around. So last night there was a discussion going on. Somebody posted, "I want to know what is the word for lesbian in Louisiana Creole," and well, there's no word that is documented in the dictionary. There are slurs for male homosexual, as it's listed. So we have words sissy, punk. These are derogatory terms, but some people use this also in a positive way now, but only for males. Now there was this whole discussion of what we should use, people coming up with different ideas, and maybe today people have posted more, but who decides? The people who have been in the group for longest. They're not elders, but they're the facilitators of the group. So there are very rich discussions that are going on. There are already like 20, 30 suggestions for what to use for these kind of words in this thread from last night. But the final say always falls back to the facilitators, and especially to Christoph, the founder of the group.
The question is why he has so big power.
He's the one who initiated everything, and he's very respected by people for that.
He's your age or he's older?
He's in his 30. I just was at his birthday party. Sorry. He's in his 30s, mid-30s. Yeah. But he looks very young if he's watching.
Does it have anything to do with Alan Landry, social linguist?
No, not that I know about. Alan Landry is from Louisiana?
No, from Canada.
Okay, well, eventually the name is the same. Yeah. No, but not that I know.
Only
The what development?
Curriculum development.
Curriculum development.
So, what are like theoretically the places where this curriculum could be implemented from your point of view? Are there like many schools in Louisiana who could incorporate this curriculum in correct Creole language?
So the curriculum development that I was talking about was kind of this online curriculum, but in the group with different tasks for each month, each year for learners.
So you don't think about education yet?
We do. This is what I'm going to say. So they now 2 years ago, I was invited. A few others were invited to join a group, a committee in this state organization, the French development, because technically they have a remit to look after Creole, but they just haven't. So for the first time we had a Creole committee. That's why we started to produce this textbook. And ultimately, yes, we want to put it in schools, but it will take a long time to get there. There's 1 or 2 schools which are interested, but my preference to implement this curriculum is not to go this way, because it's so bureaucratic, it's so much problems. The better way is this way that we can see in the Greco case, where you have a summer school, for example. So that's what I want to do. Maybe next summer we want to get, there are really good youth organizations, for example, that do summer schools. Different kinds of activities, and this would be a perfect place to try out for the first time this textbook.
And you plan these summer schools more for adults or for the children?
We haven't planned anything.
Okay.
Well, I mean, in my mind I have a vision of what I want to happen. I think the best group is adolescents or young adults, because you know, one of the things that has been so interesting about being here is seeing this wonderful community of young people who are guardians of the language too now, who are, you know, proliferating their pride for the language and their interest in the language. And we don't have that yet in Louisiana. We don't have a group of people who are on the ground in Louisiana, who are speaking the language, who are getting together to speak Creole. If you go to these events where people meet up and speak Creole, it's typically elderly native speakers, and they're great events. And if you could get in that room like 5, 6, 7, 20-year-olds who have some notion of Creole, then we could really start to move things on. So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And I am particularly interested in asking you about the perception and the reception of this elderly community towards this Facebook. And I'll explain why it's interesting. Because I'm pretty sure that these dynamics come up in various minority languages situations. And it is this, I think that the way forward is to put into contact these two worlds.
Yes, exactly.
The virtual world is imagined community, which
Yes.
at the end of the day we are not doing anything else than nation states did through other means with national languages. This imagined community, that others would call it like that, and the real, excuse my term, that
Yes.
are on the ground community, and the clashes that these sort of dynamics can generate, and how to overcome them.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And now if you read a lot of stuff about like internet ethnography, there's this idea that there is no longer a dichotomy between the virtual world and the real world, because all of us, you know, now many people are on their smartphones, laptops, online, in the real world at the same time. But this is not true for certain generations of people. For example, these generations, they've never ever seen these materials. And one thing that I found so interesting was I would go with my phone, and when I was interviewing people for my PhD, I would occasionally, we'd get talking about stuff, and I'd say, hey, let me show you something that this lady created who lives in Chicago. And I'd show them a YouTube video that she created, or a picture or something like that. And the reception is extremely positive at first. So when people at first see this, they're amazed. Oh my goodness, I can't believe somebody is writing the language. There's a video, there's a woman in California who created a children's book video, which is, it made one elderly lady that I was interviewing, it made her cry to see this, because she said, I can't believe, you know, a child, it's her child speaking the language and recording the voice. I can't believe a child is speaking the language with these beautiful illustrations of these children who look like they're, you know, they look like my grandchildren, all of this stuff. But in the language activist communities, there is a certain criticism of materials that is only happening, I'm talking about in the last 2 months, because this is when this integration started. And I was at a meeting, and we did our usual Creole meeting, had a lot of fun, and then at the end, the woman who's in charge of the meeting came to me. She said, "Oliver, I want to talk to you in private." I said, "Okay." She said, "Look, this is my translation of the Lord's Prayer into Creole. And this is his translation into Creole. And look how he writes it. You know how I wrote it?" I said, "How?" She said, "I looked it on the internet, on my computer, and I found words on my computer, and I wrote it. And he writes it with the K, and la la la." And so there is now this criticism starting, but it's along these lines, this is not how I speak, this is not how I speak. And there's a lot of discussion and sometimes quite a conflict about this. But yes, exactly, but in a kind of micro way, right? Because it's like a group of 10 people who've known each other for, in some cases, 70 years. So there's a lot of personal history there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.